The only thing, as far as we know, in the entire cosmos made in the image of God is people. So people are very important. They're just not more important than God.
Today, I'm talking with Steve Deace, Blaze Media host, author, and one of the most fearless cultural commentators in America today. Steve speaks with fire and conviction, but always with a heart to see the church awaken and the nation return to God. From politics to prophecy to personal faith, Steve brings a raw and unfiltered perspective rooted in biblical truth. This is a can't miss conversation with Steve Deace. Steve, welcome to Strong Church. Glad to have you here.
It's an honor to be here, man. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, a lot of our audience knows you from your show on the Blaze. Of course, you've written books as well. I was just really blessed to see just how genuine your heart is for the gospel. I think there's a lot of, you and I both could name probably a whole lot of conservative commentators out there that, you know, we'll talk about faith concepts, but I was very pleased to see, you know, that these things are close to your heart, that you seem to be living them, that you're walking these things out, that you're taking that, you know, so seriously. And you seem to be somebody that is very much God first, you know, culture, politics, all the other things beneath that. And so thank you for your work that you're doing. I think your voice is much needed in the world today.
I appreciate that. I really do. You know, when we started our show, when we left local radio to go national, kind of the vision that I had for it is you know, guys like me got jobs locally because of the success Rush had nationally.
Yeah.
You know, and Rush created an entire industry, whether it's people at our company like Glenn Beck and Mark Levin, they were kind of the first generation post-Rush. And then it ultimately filtered down to even local radio stations, and every top 100 market said, we have to get a local guy that does what Rush does on local issues. And so I got to be that local guy in Iowa for a while. And when I had the opportunity to leave and go national, I kind of wanted to emulate Rush in that I thought he took conservatism as a political philosophy and with his God-given talent brought it back into the mainstream of the culture again. All right, that we could be invited back into the arena of ideas again. And what I wanted to do is to have wherever God took this, however it was going to grow, I wanted that what I did to do the same thing for a biblical worldview. You know, and we've attributed this line to everybody from Augustine to Aquinas to Spurgeon. But if you just let the lion out of its cage, it'll defend itself just fine, right? And so I was hoping, and so that's always been my goal. And you know, I'm a sci-fi guy, so like the prime directive of our show is a biblical worldview, and so everything always goes back to that.
Yeah. I'd like to think, just because they're my favorites, that every great quote is either Chesterton or Augustine. That's just where I'm at.
Yes.
If I didn't say it myself, right?
Yes,
that's where I am. Look, we had a chance to talk before we started recording here about a couple of things that are close to your heart right now that you feel are maybe some genuine concerns for the church today. And you made a really interesting comment. I'd love to have you unpack that here on air, is on this issue of kind of the two greatest commandments and some confusion that the church has had, and probably specifically pastors have had in regards to that has really allowed some of the woke progressive ideas to seep their way in and really infiltrate Christian doctrine. You want to dive into that a little bit?
I think that there's two great heresies that we are facing, or manifestations of the spirit of the age. And every generation faces these, every culture faces these. They're unique to the particular zeitgeist of the culture you're in, the customs of the time. And I think internally, let's start with that one, because that's the one we have the most control over. Internally, there has been a decision that, and we've camouflaged at Lucas as seeker-sensitive, seeker-friendly, evangelistic, and I would argue, and I think you guys would agree, the church is not primarily an evangelistic institution, but a discipling one. Doesn't mean that evangelism isn't part of its mission. The first step to discipleship is evangelization, but we are called to disciple the nations, and not endlessly call people over and over again.
If I can interject, I think the separation of those things has initiated that problem.
Correct.
Evangelism is a concept that exists within the discipleship lifeline.
Correct. So now what we have is, come and we'll evangelize on Sunday mornings. Sunday morning church is for unbelievers. And if you want to be discipled, come back again on Sunday night for a program. Okay. And not coincidentally, I'm sure it's a coincidence. Okay. If you want the shallow stuff that people like, come on Sunday morning when we take the tithe. And if you want the really tougher stuff that's going to challenge you, make you grow, come on Sunday morning or Sunday night when far fewer people are going to be here. Right? Okay. So, but we've taken the two greatest commandments. Jesus said that he's summing up the 10 commandments. right? Moses comes down from the mountain. He's got 2 tablets, right? The first tablet is the vertical relationship between us and God, okay? So that's summed up with this line, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, okay?
Yeah.
The second tablet, the horizontal relationship we have with one another, okay? And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. What we have done internally in the church, ecclesiastically, Lucas, is we have taken that second commandment now, and we've made it number 1. To the point pastors will say things like, and I know your organization has heard this many times, well, if I preach about that, people will not come back, and then they won't be saved, okay? As if all of heaven is sitting there thinking, if Pastor Acme ABC nails his sermon this week, we're going to have more people up here, but man, if he blows it, it's going to be some souls lost, right? Jesus went to the cross and then just completely left the rest of it totally up to us.
Right.
Okay. Or if you can't put your like certain spin on it, like Jesus bakes the cake, but man, if your frosting doesn't just make isn't the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down, it couldn't possibly resonate. That mustard seed couldn't possibly plant and grow, okay, without your particular deft touch on things. And so the justification for this is we cannot offend our neighbor.
Yeah.
And to the point that even when the church has victories, I saw this in the church we attended at the time. I heard this from so many people around the country. The Sunday after the Dobbs decision, pastors almost apologetic that we overturned state-sanctioned baby murder.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't want to seem arrogant. We know people here don't always agree on that. How can people be sitting in church and not agree that child sacrifice is bad?
I told so many people is that if you didn't have a standing ovation at your church, when Roe is overturned, then you should probably be looking for a new church.
Yes. I mean, if anything, we should have been so tempted to go the other way and like take it to like imprecatory prayers. All right. Easy. Okay.
Right,
you know, but to sit there and be like apologetic that the Lord granted this kind of a victory and in the middle of Pride Month, no less. Okay. And via a very unlikely source. No one 20 years ago had on their bingo card, hey, Donald Trump is going to come down from NBC Universal and appoint the justices that overturned Roe. Nobody had that on their bingo card. All right. There's only one guy that does that math, man, and he doesn't dress like us. Okay. So the idea that we would not celebrate God's victories with him, but be like apologetic. All right. And it comes from this idea that the worst thing we can do is offend people. My colleague at the Blaze, Ali Stuckey, has a description of this. She calls it toxic empathy. All right. And so this idea that, well, it's always therefore by the grace of God go I, and it's never go and sin no more. There's never a standard. And I think we have incorporated this into the church. And so it's totally fine to offend God. It's totally fine to water down his word. It's totally fine to self-edit his word because we're doing that so we don't offend people. Now, listen, we can't go so far the other way. And I think there are some branches developing in the church in counter to this that are at least tempted, if not threatening, to go too far the other way. And then we're just going to abandon love your neighbor as you love yourself. That is still very important. Jesus made it number 2. Jesus did not die for a systemic theology or a systematic theology, and I'm a systematic theology guy, but Jesus died for people. All right. The only thing, as far as we know, in the entire cosmos made in the image of God is people. So people are very important. They're just not more important than God. And I think internally we've made it so that they are. And so that we're not preaching the full counsel of God because I don't want to offend you. And I think externally we refuse to see, and the spirit of the age has often manifested itself politically. I mean, even go back in the Old Testament, you see that the Jews are facing kings named Baal Peor. Like, what's Baal mean? Lord. Peor, the name of the king. He is saying, I am the ruler on behalf of the demon god of this realm. All right. So the kingdoms of the enemy have often manifested themselves politically and taken on that nomenclature and shell. And that's what's happened here. I mean, the Democratic Party platform is literally a doctrine of demons. And so a lot of our pastors don't want to recognize that and want to keep putting that in its political, kind of ether, so they don't have to address it. That gives them an out to not have to address these subjects, to the point that I am convinced that there are evangelical churches in America, Lucas, that if the trainee showed up during Pride Month and started doing drag queen storytime hour in thongs in the parking lot, that the pastor would not interrupt service to go out there with the elders to go out there and make that stop. Because we don't want to get political.
Yep.
And so you end up teaching
We
this.
just preach Jesus.
Yes, and I call it evangelical monasticism. Except at least when the Catholics built monasteries, they were in the middle of nowhere. We built our monasteries right in the middle of the most populous suburbs and exurbs of America. So we are in the central location, but we're not the central hub of the community at all. And we're not. There's drag queen storytime hour at the library. All right, there's a tranny surgery clinic in the strip mall over here, and I'm just over here preaching this parallel Jesus who never goes perpendicular with the world or the culture whatsoever. And that's why a lot of times our people walk out of church, they don't remember what was taught even a few days later. And it's not just that we won't address the macro problems and threats of the spirit of the age, but then it filters down into what's happening in my life on a micro level. Say it's Tuesday afternoon. My wife and I haven't been together in months. We're not getting along. There's an attractive young lady at the office. And at first we just hit it off. We got along. Then we did a project together. Now we go to break together. Well, now she's asking me if I want to go to lunch. Now she wants to know if I want her number. Did anything that pastor said in the last month resonate in my conscience at all, so that when this temptation comes on a random Tuesday,
equipped.
yes, I can hear the danger Will Robinson in the sector of my cerebellum. And the answer usually is no.
Yeah.
But you were taught how to be nice, how to be kind, okay? And taught how to be a complete, no threat whatsoever, not just to hell, but against the temptations you yourself are facing.
I'm reminded as you're talking about, there was a segment in my book, The Christian Left, where I took the story that we find, with Solomon, where he has, one of the cases that he tries where the two women each have a child, and the one woman, tragically ends up, suffocating her baby in the night by rolling over on top of it. And so she trades babies with the other woman, and then they come before the king, fighting about whose child the alive child is. And his response, of course, it's the thing that nobody expects, but it's the thing with the most wisdom is, give me a sword, let's cut the baby in half. And of course, the mother that is the most attached to it is the one that cries out to stop. And, I think about if the scripture, the word of God, is the baby today. We have these two sides between the progressive church or progressive Christians and we'll call it the historically, biblically, founded church, that they're both looking at this thing called the scripture that is the baby between them. And the world is looking at us trying to go, whose child is this, right?
That's a great analogy.
And I think that the answer is, who's willing to take the sword and start dissecting it?
Yep.
And I think that, when you look at the deconstruction movement, when you look at progressive Christianity, when you look at even those pastors that they might not identify with being progressive or woke or deconstructed, but they're not willing to even bring the word into their messages anymore.
So they might as well be.
They might as well be that they don't have a qualm when the sword is raised to start deconstructing that or start chopping that apart. And I think that, it's a crisis within the church today. Do you think we're at all getting to the other side of wokeism? Or, we see with Gnosticism, early patristic church fathers that write against it. And then it comes back with, and Augustine has to deal with the Manichees and, these sorts of things. Are we just seeing it kind of drop down for a minute? Is it dealt with? Where are we at in the equation?
I'm glad you used that analogy too, because at the age of 50, you start realizing, hey, I've seen some of this before, right?
Yes.
And so what we call woke, when I was entering college in the 90s, it was political correctness, all right? And then in the 2000s, it rebranded as intersectionality, okay? In our time, it is rebranded as woke, which you said about Gnosticism. You're watching Gnosticism in many cases make a comeback now, all right? And so to me, I always think Hell has a greatest hits album. And they just kind of the cover art changes, all right? And so, maybe there's, there's this guitar riff is instead of keyboard. Eddie Van Halen goes from guitar solos to playing the keyboard on 1984, right? All right, but it's still Van Halen, okay? and maybe the lead singer's not Sammy Hagar instead of David Lee Roth, but it's still Van Halen.
Yeah.
All right, and so I think they just repackages a greatest hits album. There's nothing new under the sun, just new people under the sun who haven't heard this version of it yet, and so we tend to fall for it. That's not new. What is new, and this is not even new within Christendom. I would argue it's just new in this country and culture, because we live in the only country who at the very least can count on Christianity as its chief inspirational influence.
Yeah.
Now we can debate from that time forward, from that premise, how directly inspirational and influenceable was Christianity or influential within the founding itself, right? In terms of philosophers like Locke and Hobbes and Montesquieu and all these other guys. But there is, from the time the Pilgrims fleeing the Church of England,
Yeah.
the Puritans land on Plymouth Rock and they sign the first governing document of the country saying they're doing this for the advancement of the Christian religion. All right. 13 colonies, all founded by some vestige of the Christian church, with one exception, Rhode Island, but that was founded to welcome all the vestiges of the Christian church. So at least at the proto-nascent stages of this country, Christianity was one of its chief influences. And so we have never had to deal with the things previous generations have. We've never, the large cloud of witnesses the author of Hebrews is talking about, they had to deal with knocks on the door.
Yeah.
Will you say Kaiser Kyrios? Will you bow the knee? Right? There's no American, conduit to Polycarp. Hey, you were a faithful citizen of the realm for 70 years,
Right.
and on your death's door, they want you to, go ahead and disavow your God, and you won't do it, so they burn you alive. I mean, the stuff that we're seeing now, like if you're praying at a clinic in Nashville, you go to prison, all right? These are what just passed in Colorado. We'll take your kids away. These are the proto-forms of these two, the city of God, as Augustine said, and the city of man,
Yep.
vying for dominion on earth. We're just now seeing the kinds of things. The only believers who saw this in America until now were if you had too much melanin in your skin for the first 200 years of the country,
Yeah.
you faced stuff like this, particularly if you lived in the southern part of the country. But in terms of en masse, if you believe the Bible, you are no longer given the benefit of the doubt in American culture. We are the first generation that has faced that.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to require our pastors to get tougher, because our people are going to have to get tougher. All right, the conditions here are more difficult than they used to be. You will not be given a benefit of the doubt anymore. We're living in a time right now, Lucas, that if a male teacher said, "Hey, I've got these books on how to become an OnlyFans star, and I want to give them to the young girls in my class," we'd arrest him and get him out of that school right away.
Yeah.
If that same male teacher said, "Hey, I've got these gay porn books, and I want to put those in the school library," we would say, well, we can't possibly touch those. And in fact, that might even be enlightened to do that. It's the old saying, to truly find out whom it is that lords over you, find out whom it is you're not allowed to offend.
Yeah.
Right? And so what's happened is the American flag has come down and the rainbow flag has gone up. We are a conquered people in many respects. And so because of that, we're going to have to learn how to live counterculturally now. And the church has had to do that throughout its history. The American church has never had to do it before. And I think en masse that we're not prepared for it. And not to toot you guys' horn, but that's why I'm here, because I think ultimately this is the kind of organization that can get the church and the people prepared to understand the signs of the times that we're in.
Well, I appreciate that deeply. And of course, we have you joining Charlie and myself over at Dream City this evening for what we call Freedom Night in America. And Charlie's going to be picking your brain and unpacking, I think, a lot more of this. And we'll make that available as well to our audience for those that want to dive into it. Let's talk a little bit practically. As you referenced, we do have a lot of pastors that we work with. We're approaching about 4,000 pastors that are connected to TPUSA faith in various forms and growing every single day. What would you say to the pastors out there? What can they do? How can they avoid some of these pitfalls? Give us some practical steps that you're seeing right now.
I don't want to seem trite, but I think a lot of this comes from a lack of courage. Now that I'm past 50, I pray all the time, every day. There's two things that are part of my daily prayers every day. I want to finish my race well. I see too many men, particularly when they were significant and successful at my age or younger, that then go on and get soft and do not finish well. My son my one and only son just graduated from high school, our youngest. And I left him a video, welcoming, into the patriarchy, basically. You made it. We did it against my best efforts as your dad. We made it to the end. But I vowed to him, I said, hey, there's generations of dysfunction in our family. And God used me as the reset button, okay? Now you're going to be the one that's going to decide what trajectory we take from here. And I said, my promise to you, I covenant to you, I will finish my race well, and you hold me accountable to that. So when I hand the reins over to you, okay, that you won't be in the same kind of hole that I inherited when the reins were handed to me, right? And I do think we lack a lot of courage. I think the older generation is not doing a good enough job of modeling finishing well. I don't think the older generation en masse is all that eager to train up their substitutes and replacements. But, the boomers, I think, are going to live longer and better than any human generation has, probably since the antediluvian era. Okay. And that's great, but it's also conditioned them to think that they're so indispensable and irreplaceable that they have to hang on and hang on and hang on and hang on. I mean, just think of the 5 or 6 most respected evangelical pastors in America and ask yourself, an organization that has as many connections to churches as you guys do you guys know who the succeeding pastor is for that guy? And in many cases, you probably couldn't give me a
Nope.
name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you kind of knew Joshua was going to succeed Moses.
Yep.
You kind of knew Elisha was going
Yep.
to succeed Elijah, right?
Yeah.
You kind of knew that Jesus had apostles, right? And so the other thing too is I had what I can only describe is I had a supernatural experience in a hospital a couple of years ago with a deadly MRSA infection. And I mean, I don't claim to hear the audible voice of God a lot, but I just heard God speak to me out loud. Stephen, I need apostles and not assassins. And that broke me when I heard it. I mean, I sobbed in the hospital corridor when I heard that. And this would be so I would say to the one group, it really is practically as simple as courage. I'm here with my pastor, Pastor Jesse. And he would tell you that up until COVID, basically, he was a wimp. And he knew, and the Holy Spirit was telling him he was. And then finally, with COVID and everything, he finally had to admit, look in the mirror one day and say to the Holy Spirit, yeah, you've been right all along, okay? And that there was no problem for him that courage could not solve.
Yeah.
So I would say practically, if you were in that group, it's just as simple as courage. And that courage comes from faith. Do I trust? I've spoken at at least 3 different churches in the last few years all over the country. Same story. Pastor was weak, got courage after COVID, started preaching the full counsel of God. Church emptied out, and he thought, oh no. And then the church grew to twice the size of what he had before, because God said, now we're going to bring my people here.
We see the story all the time.
All right,
Absolutely.
so having courage is the same thing as having faith. But to those out there that are watching or listening that have my predisposition or yours, my encouragement to you is to be an apostle and not an assassin. And this is where I have to check my aggressive instincts and initiative all the time the other way, okay? To make sure I understand that, hey, Paul says on one hand, liars, thieves, adulterers, homosexuals, fornicators, slanderers, murderers, these do not inherit the kingdom of heaven. But such as once were you.
Yeah.
And I have to remember that a lot. I think, our marriage went through the classic evangelical midlife crisis a few years ago when we were like going to be the next cliche in the pastor's office. We don't think we should be married anymore, and the Lord pulled us out of that pit. Now we have the best marriage we've ever had. But that was a good reminder for me that I am one bad day and one bad decision from becoming what I'm warning about all of the time. And so if you do know the signs of the times, and if you are willing to be bold and you have the kind of disposition we talk about, understand though, you still have to protect your 6 and watch your rear flank and make sure that your boldness doesn't become arrogance, that you don't think that you're almost invulnerable, that you cannot be touched, that maybe you can maybe I can go back to meeting one-on-one with on a frequent basis with women that I'm not married to, or whatever was your weakness in the past, to be vigilant, and to also remember that in the end, yes, we want to crush demonic ideologies, okay? But Jesus died for people. Just because we put love your neighbor as you love yourself on a pedestal that doesn't belong, doesn't mean it doesn't have its own pedestal.
Such wise words there, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us here.
You bet.
Strong Church. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We got to have you back on here. If people want to find out more about you or get some of your resources or tune in the show, give us some places they can go.
I think the easiest thing to do is just to follow me on X at Steve Deace Show there, DEACE. Everything I do kind of gets centralized there. So at Steve Deace Show on X.
Awesome. All right, we'll have all that in the show notes. Until next time, I'm your host, Lucas Miles. You're watching Strong Church. Stay strong.